Around a year ago, my cousin snagged a sizable piece of land at a bargain price. Positioned in the middle of nowhere, it was essentially barren terrain. No roads, no flowing water, not even a smidgen of cell reception. My purpose for visiting was to help with an initial cleanup. The field was on a slope that edged up against some woods, descending to a large boggy lake. Even though this place was essentially wasteland, my cousin was incredibly precious over it. At the water's edge, he had dug a hole and filled it with straw. He told me that he didn't want me pissing all over the grass, and that's where I should go to the bathroom. I gave him a funny look, and he flipped out, going on a rant about how he wouldn't take a dump on my carpet, and I should treat his land with the same respect. To be fair, he had just spent his life savings on it. To most, it would have looked like a bad investment, but to him, it was paradise. We dive into the task, lifting rocks and timber and stacking them in a towering pile. Then we each grab a wheelbarrow and head off in opposite directions to pick up smaller items. The closer I get to the edge of the woods, the more distracted I get. Even though it's the middle of the day, it makes me feel very uncomfortable, and I keep getting flickers of movement in my peripheral vision. Some sort of primal instinct within me tells me not to turn my back on the trees. As I steer my wheelbarrow in the other direction, it gets caught on a tree root, and I kneel down to free it. Then from behind me, there's a piercing scream from somewhere deep within the woods. My body reacts instinctively and I spin around, eyes darting in every direction, searching for any signs of danger, but it's hard to make anything out within the dense forest. My cousin can tell that I'm spooked and runs over to join me. He asks me what's wrong and I tell him about the noise. He scoffs at me like I'm a moron. "It's foxes," he says. "The woods are full of them." He tells me that they are too sneaky to spot, but at night they can be heard screeching at one another. He says it's a messed up sound, but nothing to be afraid of. I frown and look back into the woods, and he punches me on the arm. He tells me to stop being so skittish. It was bugging him, and I'm killing the vibe. After a long day of cleaning, I'm totally pooped. We sit at a campfire eating some food and drinking some beers. Then I crawl into my tent, desperate for some shut-eye. Meanwhile, my cousin decides to serenade the night with his harmonica. What a unique experience. He's sucking and puffing on that thing like a teenager, fumbling his way through a first kiss. I'm grateful when he finishes up. I hear him throw something into the fire, hopefully that fucking harmonica, and then he goes into his tent. Finally, it's peaceful enough for me to fall asleep. Sometime in the night I wake suddenly, sitting bolt upright in my sleeping bag. I don't know what woke me, and it takes me a second to compose myself. I listen carefully to my surroundings. All I hear is the sounds of the night, crickets chirping and small crackles and pops from the dwindling fire. After all the beer, I'm now paying the price and bursting for a leak. I just lay there for a while, not wanting to leave my tent. I don't much enjoy the thought of wandering through the field at night. I know I'll have to walk down to the straw-filled hole that my cousin dug out by the lake, but nature's call becomes too insistent to ignore, so I gather myself together, unzip my tent, and venture outside. The dying embers of the fire cast a faint glow. Peering down the slope towards the lake, a haunting mist slithers over its surface. I briefly entertain taking a leak onto the fire, but quickly dismiss it, dreading the morning lecture from my cousin if he hears the sizzle. Instead, I reluctantly head down towards the water. The woods envelop our camp from all directions. I try not to look at it. Even in the daytime, it was inky black in there, but under the cover of darkness, it was like staring into the abyss. I finally get down to the water's edge and find that ridiculous piss hole. It's as I'm relieving myself that I realise how quiet it has suddenly become. I've never experienced anything like it, as if the whole world has been put on mute. Then the silence is cut in two as a chilling sound tears through the night. A high-pitched shriek from the other side of the lake. It makes me tense up, and I pause midstream. It's the foxes, I tell myself. Those stupid foxes. I squint over the water, through the mist, into the dark forest beyond. I reason that if I can just spot an animal, any animal, I can attribute that strange sound to it, and maybe that will bring me some level of comfort. There's another shriek. It sounds closer than the last one. I'm still a little drunk, so perhaps a little bit more ballsy than I ought to be. I start to move around the embankment to see if I can pin down where the sound is coming from, but it's incredibly boggy, which hinders my ability to make much progress. Then something catches my eye. My steps falter and a prickling sense of unease settles over me. A figure stood there. Its form is skeletal, entwined within the branches, and high above, nearly at the tree canopy, rests its head. A ghostly white ram's head, a feature that strikes me as particularly horrific. My first thought is that it's some sort of fucked up scarecrow, something my cousin has constructed, maybe to ward off poachers and trespassers. It's the kind of deranged thing that I can imagine him creating. Perhaps he put it there to scare me before he went to bed, something cruel to push my buttons because of how freaked out I got earlier in the day. Well, if that's the case, he's nailed it, because this thing is absolutely terrifying. I stare at this strange figure, trying to reassure myself that this thing is a man-made structure, but the more I look at it, the more menacing it becomes. I'm having a hard time looking away. Something about it oozes pure evil. I take a step backwards. Then the jaw of this thing opens wide and it lets out a blood-curdling shriek. My whole body quivers, goosebumps rippling over me from head to toe. Then it starts moving around the lake with rapid and erratic movements. A bizarre and unsettling display, each twitch and spasm propelling it forward, its head jerking and twisting as it keeps its gaze fixed on me. I turn on my heels and run back up towards where we are pitched, screaming for my cousin. I hear him swearing as he ducks out of his tent, clutching at his rifle. I grab him by the shoulders as I stammer through the strange details of what I've just seen. I tell him that we are not safe, and his face darkens with anger. "Someone's on my land," he roars. He pushes past me and runs barefoot down to the lake. I watch him down there as he shouts obscenities and blindly aims his gun around. He fires a couple of shots off into the air. Eventually he storms back to me and tells me that whoever it was disappeared back into the woods. I try to explain that this thing had a ram's head, that it was watching me, and moved in a way that made no sense. He throws an empty beer can at my head and tells me I'm talking shit. He says he knows exactly what's going on. "It's a cult," he says. "All those rich bankers and lawyers, the 1%, this is how they get their rocks off. They come out to the countryside and dress up in weird costumes, snort coke off a goat's back and fuck each other." He strides out towards the lake and screams, "Listen, you horny goat-headed freeloaders. The orgy's over. Grab your Gucci handbags and fuck off back to the Bahamas." His outburst seems to provoke a response, as the woods around us are suddenly alive with a symphony of screams. A nerve-shattering onslaught that brings even my cousin to an abrupt halt. Gradually the sounds subside. My cousin thumbs at his nose. "Goddamn foxes," he says. We spend the rest of the night feeding the fire. I'm still really freaked out, and he's convinced the whole thing is down to wild dogs and a bunch of fat cats blowing off some steam. He sits prodding at the embers with a face like thunder. When the sun comes up, we pack up our things and head home. My cousin now firmly believes that he has a cult trespassing on his land. My only hope is that he doesn't pry too much. I dread the thought of him heading off into the woods, expecting to find some drug-induced goat orgy, and instead coming face to face with that creature from hell. Whatever is out in those woods is anything other than human. One thing's for sure, I'm never going back.